So, what do you want to be when you grow up? You've been asked that question your entire life, and you've always had an answer. A doctor, a lawyer, an astronaut, a CEO. Whatever the answer was at the time, you said it with confidence because the question was hypothetical, and hypothetical questions are easy. But at some point, and nobody tells you when it happens, that question stops being hypothetical. It becomes real. And that's when most people that I've met go quiet because the honest answer for a majority of adults is I don't know. So I'll go first. I'm 20 years into practicing law. I've been a prosecutor, a litigator, a law firm partner, an executive director, a general counsel, and now most recently a chief legal officer. And if you asked me to describe my career, I could do it in great detail. If you asked me what I wanted from it, I would struggle to give you an honest answer for most of those 20 years. I could tell you what I did, but oftentimes I could not tell you why. I had built a career on credentials and momentum rather than clarity. And the cost of that was years of achievement that fell hollow. I was winning cases and climbing ladders, collecting titles, and the whole time, I could not have told you what I was actually building toward. I just kept moving because I felt like if I stopped, I'd be failing. My guest today has spent more than 15 years helping people answer the question most of them have been avoiding. Carmelina Piedra is a Forbes Distinguished Certified Career Coach, an Executive Innovation Coach, and the founder of Career Coaching Pro. She's a member of the Forbes Coaches Council and the International Association of Professional Career Coaches. She holds a master's degree in human-centered communications design from the Institute of Design at IIT and is certified in Luma Institute's human-centered design thinking. She was recently voted one of the top 15 career coaches in Illinois, and before she became a coach, she built a career in advertising, marketing, and visual design leadership, where she learned early on that branding yourself and creating a cohesive story about your background is very critical to your success. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit and she saw how many people were struggling, she founded Career Coaching Pro to help, and she's been doing it ever since. She's here to make the case that the reason that most people feel stuck in their careers, it's not the market, it's not the economy, and it's not their boss. It's that they've never really clearly defined what they're moving toward. That's why, when we come back, Carmelina and I will be making the case for knowing what you actually want out of your career. Welcome back to The Case For. I'm your host, Matt Campobasso, and today I am joined by Carmelina Piedra, the founder of Career Coaching Pro, and a woman whose entire professional life has been built around helping people get honest about what they want and then helping them go get it. Carmelina, welcome to The Case For. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. This is great.
So listen, before we jump into the case that you're going to build today, I want the people who are listening to understand who you are and how you got here, because your story is not the typical career coaching story. You didn't start here. You built a career in advertising and marketing and visual design. You have a master's from a great design school. And then during the pandemic, you pivoted into something completely different. So if you can, please walk us through that arc. What were you doing before? What prompted your change? And what was it like to launch a business during COVID?
Thank you so much, Matt. So, yeah, as you mentioned, I have quite a bit of experience in corporate America, and I spent some time building up my design career and being an innovator. I went to ID to get a master's degree in research and strategy. I've led groups, teams. I've been in corporate America for much of my career. And then when COVID hit, I felt like it was a really important time to help more people. So I've been mentoring and coaching for 15 years, but I wanted to make it my full-time job, which, was a challenge, of course, being used to being in corporate for so long. There's a lot of challenges that come with starting a business, but I'm so glad that I did because now I'm able to help more people. It's not as much of a pivot as most people would imagine. When you're in leadership positions, you're spending a lot of time helping people grow in their careers. And now I'm doing it outside of corporate and for more people. So I'm really excited to be doing that now.
Okay. Carmelina, something I saw on your website stuck with me. I believe you mentioned that you learned very early in advertising that branding yourself as an individual and creating a cohesive story about your background and your passions was critical to success. When did you realize that most people don't do that for themselves? That they're kind of walking through their career without a clear narrative about who they are and what they're building?
So I would say, gosh, early 2000s, I started to think about how can I promote myself to make me stand out in the competition. And one of the things that I did was build a portfolio. As designers, we all need portfolios. So I designed a portfolio online. I learned how to code. I created my own portfolio so that I could basically brand myself and also share that information with people digitally so I could get the word out about me and my background and my work, most importantly. So I would say, gosh, it's been 25 years in the making. And so many people that I work with still do not understand how important it is not only to brand themselves, but also to figure out what is so important to you, what are you passionate about, and how can you bring that into your career day to day so that you're more and more happy.
I work with a lot of people. Lawyers are, most lawyers are very type A, and it's about learning and evolving and accomplishing things. And that's great from a growth mindset perspective. But I have met so many lawyers that perhaps their success or their evolution, kind of working their way up the corporate ladder, has stalled. And they say, I've a hard worker, I'm smart, I care. And what I've told people is, hey, you've got to be your own kind of PR person to a degree. And that can be within a company for internal growth. That can be if you're moving into a different role or looking to have a pivot in your career. It's something that I have prioritized. I think, always haven't been great at it, but I'm getting better. But I think what it does is, and I'm sure you know this better than most, with marketing, once you have that narrative, it unlocks things for people. And it helps take, I think, general concepts and turns them into things that actually evoke feelings in people. And so then they think, oh, this person's a leader or this person is this type of leader. And I think some of the people that I've worked with that have had tremendous success, yeah, they're smart. They put in the hours for sure,
Yeah.
but they also know how to talk about themselves and portray themselves in a way that connects with people.
Absolutely. It's all about building a network, right? Your network is your moneymaker, in my opinion. So when you are meeting people, what is your pitch? How are you going to build connections and rapport with people in person? It's really important to make sure that you're connecting with people based on what you have in common with them, but also making sure that you are representing yourself in a way that really resonates with them and also with you. What is your story?
So, and I'm sure this is a big part of the coaching that you provide through Career Coaching Pro, but it sounds like from what I've read about you, your coaching, while that was when it became formal and the lead portion of your business, you've been coaching, it sounds like, for much of your adult professional life and even
Yes.
in your education.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I started teaching and coaching around 2006. I actually wanted to teach at the university, but I didn't want to go through and get my PhD and be tenured. So coaching gives me the opportunity to help people in their careers without kind of having this. But I started very, very early on when I realized that I, even after 6 years of experience, can help people be more successful. There's always somebody who doesn't have as much experience as you do. So mentoring is a huge part of what got me started. I mean, that was just a volunteer basis and I did it all the time. But I wanted to convert into a full-time coach, and I did that after 15 years of volunteering my time to the community.
So I think is it safe to say that one of the reasons why you made that your primary focus as a professional is because it's something you're passionate about that lights you up?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think all of us should try and find whatever that is. What are you most passionate about and try and get that more into your day-to-day. For me, I had a side hustle, right, for a very long time. In some cases I was doing it for free and I was volunteering my time, but you can also do things on the side where you're getting paid and then who knows, it might turn into something that's more full-time, which is what happened to me about 5 years ago.
So Carmelina, when you formalized career coaching, that part of your career, and you started meeting with people, they came to you for help. What were some of the most common things that you heard in those early sessions?
Yes.
Was it people saying, like, I don't know what I want, or was it something else entirely?
So I start every single coaching journey, right, with all of my clients with their niche. What is your niche? What are you most passionate about? Some people know exactly what they want. Some people are like, I'm not really sure if I want to do something
Mm.
different. And then I have some that are like, I have no idea what I want to do, right? So it's there's a lot of different kinds of folks and a lot of different types of interesting challenges that I deal with clients. So it's really a range of those three. But I would say, on a whole, most people are not really convinced that what they're doing or what they have been doing is even what they want to do when they grow up. And in some cases, they've grown up. They've been grown up for a long time, right? So decades worth of work going into, as you mentioned earlier, like following, doing the next thing, getting your next degree, getting certified in certain areas, but they're still unsure what exactly is it that they want to do.
Yeah, I've seen that myself, and obviously not as a career coach, but I do make it a point to try to mentor younger lawyers. And as I moved into corporate America and away from law firm practice,
Yeah.
non-lawyers, and I can't tell you how many times if someone has said to me, "Well, out of school, I went and got this job, and I've just kind of been doing it for the last 15 years." And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that one company. It could be they left 3 companies. They made the overt choice to go do it somewhere else. And so I feel like, there's almost like a default set of thinking principles for most people, which is you kind of make that decision right out of college or law school or medical school
Yeah.
to go do something, and then you kind of just bump your way through it
Mhm.
for decades. So this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that, and I'm so glad to hear that you're also mentoring because I think that's so important. I do feel that the majority of people that are in leadership roles in corporate America, unfortunately, are not trained as a manager, and so that lacks, right? That career development, coaching within organizations, it struggles, and people leave organizations all the time because they don't feel like they're getting the growth that they need. I think the best companies out there are the ones that are not just helping people move up in their career, but helping them get into a role that really gets them passionate and where they really feel like they want to wake up every single morning.
Yeah, I think for too many people, it's probably subconscious, but they settle with, well, I'm doing the job, I'm getting a paycheck. It's not my dream, but it's fine.
Yep.
I'll get, next year I'll deal with that.
Yeah.
And I think for companies, the perspective, in my experience at least, has been, well, we have somebody in the role who, they're able to do the basics of the job. It's fine. I think what you're saying and what I'm hearing, and I agree with you, is there's this Venn diagram overlap where the company is helping that person slot into a role in a way that is lighting them up or gets them passionate, right? There's a
Yeah.
there's a belief behind the why are we doing this? And in my experience, when that is unlocked, the employee and the company win, right? The
100%.
company gets more value. The employee feels more purpose when they're showing up every
Yep.
day. And it's not to say that every job, every job isn't the right fit. But I think there are a lot of situations where both the employer and the employee are willing to settle for kind of the bare minimum.
Mhm.
And there's just, I think you're leaving a lot of value on the table on both sides of the equation.
100%. I completely agree. I think that some of the best companies out there will take the extra time. A lot of managers don't necessarily know how to even have those discussions with their employees, which is really a very, very sad state of affairs.
Yeah, agreed. So, Carmelina, if you've listened to the podcast before or anybody listening, when I have a guest on, normally I kind of step back and ask them to make the case. You and I have obviously been collaborating on preparing for today's episode.
Yeah.
And as I see it, we're going to kind of make this case together, and I hope that's okay. I'm really passionate about this.
Yeah.
It took me so long to decide what I wanted out of my career. And so, before we started recording, we were chatting a little bit about our kids. I have 3, you have 3. And I think as a parent, you want to keep your kid healthy and get them an education, make sure they're, socialized. But I think about how big of a piece of my life, my adult life, especially my career has been. And I am fulfilled. I know a lot of people who aren't.
Mhm.
And so I think about this topic not only as important for those individuals in the workforce today, but for that next generation of people coming up. And I want my kids to find careers that are rewarding and empowering and obviously, give them the security financially that they need in life. Money comes and goes. I feel like some of the happiest people I know have jobs that they really love. And you don't need to have a math degree to understand the inputs and outputs there. You spend so much time working as an adult, having a job that's rewarding and feeling purpose driven.
Yeah.
It's not a surprise that it's going to lead to abject happiness.
Yeah. And my parents are Italian. They're immigrants from Italy. My experience with them, my mom always told me, do not follow the money, right? It's not going to make you happy. If you're in a job that you love, the money will come. And she's so right. She's so right.
My dad is an Italian immigrant as well. I don't remember the advice he gave me about my career. I think I just growing up, education was preached as like non-negotiable.
Yes.
Like My brother, I have two
Yeah.
younger brothers. I remember my mom and my dad, but primarily my dad saying, "You're going to go as far into school as possible. And whatever it costs, whatever sacrifices we have to make,
Yeah.
it's going to be worth it." And I think it's that investment in, that increases optionalities. With that, I'm going to jump into kind of our joint opening statement and lay out the case that I want to make today. I'll frame it up and then I'd love for you to add to it.
Sure.
So, as I said at the beginning of the episode, in my experience, most people are not able to articulate what they want from their career. They don't know what they want. They don't know what they're supposed to want. Most people go do something that they think is going to impress their parents or their peers or their family or their LinkedIn network, but they've really never sat down and honestly defined what they're actually moving toward.
Hmm.
And in my experience, that lack of clarity is not a minor gap. I think it's actually the root cause of almost every career problem.
Yeah.
The wrong job, the plateau, burnout, restlessness. I have so many people that I know that tell me about the Sunday scaries. And, I don't mean to say that my job is a pleasure cruise. It has its challenges,
Sure.
but I don't know if I've ever experienced the Sunday scaries. I
Hmm.
don't go to bed on Sunday night thinking, oh man, I have to go do that again for 5 days.
Yeah.
I'm not on the other side of the spectrum saying I'm so excited to get up tomorrow and work, but I do feel fortunate that that's not something that I'm having to navigate. And so as a lawyer, here's how I think about it. I litigated for 11 years. And one of the first things you have to do with the court is you have to articulate what you want the court to do. Why am I here? There's a section of every legal filing. It's called the relief requested, and it has to be specific. You can't walk into a courtroom and say, I want justice. Justice is a feeling. That's not a position. You have to say, I want this specific outcome for this reason, and then you support it with evidence. And I think most people, their career strategy is the equivalent of walking into the courtroom of life and saying, I want to be happy, but then not finding that happiness and then wondering, why is nothing changing? So, Carmelina, as a career coach,
Yeah.
when someone sits down with you and says, I just want to be happy in my career, what do you hear? And what's the first thing you say back to them? Because I know from talking with you and reading about you, your human-centered design training is about
Mhm.
starting with the person
Yeah.
and not the system. And I'd love for you to expand on that for the listeners.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that you made that connection. And I appreciate you saying that so much because a lot of what human centered designers do is we study the human, right? We study the human and be able to uncover strengths and weaknesses. What are their passions to help them uncover what is best suited for them? I think most people change careers 3 times on average in their career. That's a lot of times. And so, we would want to try and get it right earlier on if possible. But changing and pivoting as an innovator, we always have to be pivoting. Now there's
Mm.
AI, right? So we all have to be pivoting. There are some naysayers, of course, with the AI that's out today, but we have to think about how can we all be more strategic in nature because the automated portions of those jobs or most jobs are going to go away. So how can we pivot?
Mhm.
This is a great time to uncover that. I think where most people fail in their thinking is they think if they make more money, they will be happier. And money really does not buy happiness, right? So you might, especially with immigrants, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be an engineer, right? These are your options. And then you don't kind of stray away from that, right? I was more of a designer and artist, right? And so that isn't necessarily like the path that my parents would have recommended for me, but it kind of led me into this, teaching path, this coaching path, et cetera. So it's important to try and get it right as soon as possible. But if you haven't, it's okay, right? It's not something that you need to figure out. And we all need to kind of be pivoting. There are assessments that we can do. I do assessments with my clients to try and uncover, right, and make aware what are the strengths and weaknesses in what talents you have and your skills that will lean you closer to a type of role that makes sense for you. And most people have not done that. In fact, at the high school now, they're actually running some of these assessments with their students. I don't think they're doing that like nationwide or anything like that, but they are doing it at some high schools. I know at my kids' high schools, they do that to try and get that correctly, right? Help guide them earlier rather than later. And so by adding it into high schools and institutions, it will help. There's also, okay, well, now I know what I want to do, but now how am I going to get into the right college, right? That is so difficult and challenging right now, right? To get into some of these bigger and better colleges. So it's an ongoing journey that people need assistance with as they continue. And then even within their careers, if they're not getting assistance from their managers, how am I going to work with a coach to be able to help me? I help a lot of people have the right discussions with their managers at their companies.
Mhm.
So because their managers aren't aware of the kinds of questions they should be asking to help them with career development coaching. So, by having a conversation with me, I can help them have an intelligent conversation with their managers so that it starts the right dialogue and gets them moving in the right direction. So, hopefully, that answered your question.
Absolutely. I was thinking about this as I was listening to you. The human-centered approach, human beings are, we're so unique, right? And I don't say that as a, touchy-feely kumbaya. I say it in like every one of us is our own genetics, a bit of our own nature, and then obviously our nurture. And expecting everybody to kind of slot into a workforce and have a good experience, I think is kind of silly
Hmm.
because if you start with the company and the job, I know 1,000 lawyers, but I also know that they're not just because they're lawyers, they're all 1,000 different versions of people. And so starting with who the person is, and to your point, trying to assess that and use a data-driven approach
Yeah.
to then, okay, this is off the table, or these are likely to not be areas that you're going to thrive in or enjoy. You know, it seems like as you describe it, it's such an obvious approach. But to your point, some high schools may be doing it. For the most part, I don't think we are.
Yeah.
And so that's hopefully something that from a societal perspective, we're able to fix over time. But with that, I want to move to Exhibit A. So Exhibit A is what I call the three versions of want. And so I think that for most people at any given time, there's three versions of what someone wants, or three questions or categories. Version one is what you're supposed to want. That's your title, salary, trajectory. That would make your parents proud or your peers envious. This is like the LinkedIn version of your career. It looks right from the outside. It checks the boxes. It's what you tell people at a dinner party when you puff out your chest and you want to feel proud. Version two is what you don't want. And I think for most people, myself included, it's I don't want to be micromanaged. I don't want to travel constantly. I don't want another version of my last job.
Mm.
And this feels more like a direction, but I think it's actually avoidance. It's saying, hey, you know what? These are non-starters for me. So while I think it's important for us to know what we're trying to avoid, that's obviously a different thing than what we're running toward. And so to me, version three is really around what we want and what you actually need. And I think that's
Yeah.
quiet and the hardest one to decide. And in reading some of your writings and things like that, I would imagine you would agree, this is very unexamined for most people.
Hmm.
And I think, I don't know, what is that your experience that people are just not able to tap into
Yeah.
that?
So I think there's at the very top is what is it that I really want to do? What makes me happy? But then under that, there's a lot of different things that we need to be thinking about. What kind of culture do I want? What kind of company would I work best in? You mentioned the travel, like, am I better in consulting versus in house? Right? There's all of these questions that are almost like under the cover of the hood of the car, right? The car might be the actual, career path itself, but then under it, there's a lot of different things that we need to uncover as well to get you into the right type of company. What makes you happy? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you not? Are you not set up for that, right? Do you want to work for yourself? Do you want to work in an organization? What kind of organization would you like to work in? What kind of culture? What kind of manager do you want to work for? Two things that are the most important for happiness in career. One is, yes, am I in the right job? But two, am I going to get along with my manager? Are they going to help me with my career growth? Those are the most important things that you need to, figure out as far as not just what it is that's going to make me happy, but what kind of job is going to make me happy within that actual role.
And so as a career coach, I'm sure you're on the front lines of this. I think about my experience in my career applying for jobs. A lot of these questions that you're advocating people should be
Yeah,
asking, which I agree, I think they're important. It's hard to penetrate that from a job posting or like one or two or three different interviews.
sure.
Um, and so what is your experience been, or what do you tell your clients to
Yeah,
keep their antenna up for that'll help them kind of bridge, point A, which is what they want, and point B, which is what's the reality? Because sometimes, unfortunately, if a company's desperate or they're looking for a certain type of candidate, they're selling the best version of themselves. And so you may not get a sense of, the reality of who the manager is or how the company's culture works until you're inside.
So As a human-centered designer, we often ask for feedback, right? Roses, thorns, and buds could be negatives, positives about your job, and maybe opportunities for growth. So I actually ask clients to keep a journal of what makes them happy, roses, what isn't working well, thorns, and opportunities for growth, which are buds. And we discuss this journal. So, you might keep a journal for a week or two. Think about all of your past jobs that you've done in the past. It's really important to not only just kind of look at your past, look at your past jobs, but which ones are more closely tied to, the day to day that's going to make you actually happy. Right. And it's really important
Mhm.
to make sure that you are looking at your journal entries, bringing that to a coach and discussing it.
So I think that's really interesting. So you're asking your clients to keep a real-time pulse on what their experiences are rather than sitting down and attempting to answer these very deep questions all at once.
Exactly. Right. So it's important to make sure are taking a look at the past and using that as a way to understand what your potential future could be. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
It does. It does. It really does. I'm just thinking about my own experiences through that lens and, how I don't want to say mindlessly, but, you know, starting a new career or taking on a new role, leaving an existing company where you have, capital and things like that, and starting something new is such a big decision. And I'm reflecting on perhaps how carelessly I made some of those decisions. I don't know that I would have qualified them as careless in the moment, but as you're describing the sorts of things that you ask your clients to reflect on, I really wish I had had someone kind of saying, "Hey, Matt, think about these things as you move." And sometimes it's our gut instinct. You meet people, you talk to a company, you do a little bit of research. So I don't want to say I was making these decisions blind, but it feels like there's a better way to do that. And so as I'm listening to you talk about how you coach your clients, I think to myself, wow, I could have really used that sort of support along the way in my career. Let's talk about Exhibit B next. So I think I would love to hear from you just in your experience working with your clients. When you're meeting with a client, I would imagine that if not the hardest part of the conversation, but it's probably one of the more challenging parts, which is just clarity around them being able to answer what they want in their career. How do you help? I guess number one, is that true? Is that a challenge? And number two, how do you help them get from one end of that question to actually understanding what they want with a degree of confidence?
Yeah, so I think it's always starting with that foundation. So, what is the niche? What would make them happy? And then using that as a basis for everything else that we do. I think a lot of coaches, unfortunately, don't start there, right? They always deal with everything else after that. Like, I need help with my resume. Okay, well, that's great. But what if they're in the wrong role? Why are you spending time on a resume for a potential role that isn't even the right fit or won't even make me happy, right? So, this foundation is critical to people's success. If you don't start there, you're going to get everything else wrong after that. So, this foundational discussion about what exactly is it that would make me happy, what kind of role, what kind of company would make me happy, and then starting from that and then building everything else around that, right? Even if it's I'm not looking for a new job, maybe it's I just want to be happy in my day to day. I really
Mm.
like my company. I really like my boss. I really like everything about it, but I just feel like I am not happy in the day to day.
Have you had with your clients, have you had success where a client has come to you with that exact, not exact, but a scenario like that, which is, I like my company, I like my role, I like my team,
Yeah.
I'm just not happy.
Yeah.
Okay. And how can you kind of give me, again, without getting into any specifics that is
Sure.
going to reveal someone's identity, can you give me an example of that from a narrative perspective?
Yeah. So many times it's, I want to grow in my career and I don't know what's next, right? Unfortunately, my manager isn't really having a lot of discussions with me about it. I might have one
Mhm.
on ones, but we talk mostly about the work. And that to me is an indicator that that manager was placed in that management position without management training. Right. And most of
Yes.
us that grow in our career start as a worker bee and we work our way up without training. And so what happens is when we have one on ones with our direct reports, we're talking to them mostly about the work because that is what we know, because we used to be in that role, 5, 10 years ago. But because of the lack of management experience, right, we are not spending enough time with people on talking about their career and their career growth. That is really what makes people very unhappy at their work. So most people come to me saying, I want to move up. I'm not getting career growth. I either want to leave and find something new because that's how I can get a step up in my career. Or I need to have a discussion with my leader or my manager about how I can move up. And many managers don't know, like don't know what role to put them in, right? Because they just don't have that training. So it's really important for the individual to outline a career progression that works for them versus their manager telling them what they should be doing as a step up. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And
Okay.
the beginning of that around, a lot of individuals, being elevated in their career are worker bees who have not received management training. That has been my experience almost uniformly across my career. And there are people who I think are innately good managers or have those skills. And so they may not, they may do okay without that training. But I think I'm thinking about that from an executive perspective. And I would imagine a lot of the company's pushback is, well, management training, it's a soft skill. Like there's not really an ROI there. You kind of have to look down that chain to realize there is an ROI. That is engaged employees who stay,
Yes.
reduced attrition. And I don't think companies think about things collectively with that degree of granularity.
Yes.
And it just feels like opportunity being left on the table.
Absolutely. It's because they're overwhelmed, right? They're doing two
Mhm.
jobs. A good people manager should only manage people. So we get
Yeah.
into these situations where there's a player coach type of role. And so what happens is we spend 10% of our time managing people and 90% of the time managing their work.
Mhm.
And so that becomes a very, very big challenge.
Yeah, it's a challenge that I manage teams. I have managed lawyers for a really long time, and I've never been given any formal management
Yep.
training. I think I'm a decent manager based on feedback I've gotten from my team members, but to your point, I've often had to be a player coach, and I used player coach, that exact phrase, in a call earlier today. I was interviewing a candidate for my company on a different team, and we're a smaller company, so I said, there's a lot of player coaches here. And so to your point, you know, I think with bigger companies, the luxury of a people manager as a solo
Yeah.
role is more obvious because there's a larger set of resources. It's smaller companies, it's not always perfect, but that doesn't mean these companies can't give manager training. I think that's the missing piece here from my perspective.
100%. Yeah. And everyone is short staffed now, right? So people are doing double duty. Consulting companies, they do a tremendous job, actually. They have mentors who are managers, and they're not
Mhm.
even embedded in their day to day work. They know nothing about what they're doing in their day to day work or on projects.
So they're there just to provide support from like a human
Yes.
professional perspective?
Absolutely. Yes.
Really?
And they manage more people, right? They have bigger teams that they're managing, but they don't know anything about the work. So 360 reviews can be really, really helpful for that, right? That means you could get reviews from people that you're working with, feedback, so that you can pivot and share that information with your manager, and your manager can help coach you on some of the feedback that you're getting from your peers. So 360 reviews can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like it. That's a very interesting structure. It kind of feels like scaffolding around the employee body, which is a no-brainer. Again, it comes from a need or the ability to have resourcing for that, but I can see how in a consultancy that would make complete sense.
Yeah.
So the next exhibit I have, Exhibit C, is this one's going to be all you. And this is really the framework for getting honest. In listening to you, Carmelina, I feel like for you to be effective, you need the people you work with, your clients, to be honest with you about what they want. And maybe they don't know that right away. Maybe the first step is being honest about not knowing what they want.
Yeah.
So I think that's, establishing the problem. But what I'd love is for you to give anybody listening here a little bit of a roadmap. And so you do this for a living. The results speak for themselves. From your website, I see your clients are seeing 3 times more interest in interviews, double the job offers, 25% more salary, and they're finding roles that fit them in a way that allows them to be effective and happy in half the time. So clearly what you're doing works. Walk us through the process. When someone walks into your office or you get on a Zoom call with them for the first time and they say to you, I don't know what I want, Carmelina, what happens next?
Yeah, so this happens quite frequently. I don't know what to do next, right? It could be I don't know what to do in my next step in my career, or it's like I'm just not happy with what I want to do. Third scenario is I'm having trouble finding a role and I've been unemployed for a long time. So now I'm suddenly going to shift and pivot because I'm having trouble. So sometimes there are people in the right jobs, but they don't know how to get a job in that field. So then now they think, oh, I have to basically, pivot completely and change course, et cetera, et cetera. So it can happen from the other flip side as well, right?
Mm.
Which is I'm struggling with finding a job. So now I must pivot because there must be something wrong with me. Okay, so it happens on both ends, both spectrums. It could be people seeking jobs or people that are in careers that are not making them happy. So what I do first is I build rapport with my client. This is really important because if I don't have a relationship with my client, they're not going to be honest with me and they're not going to tell me things that are going to help me do my job. The other is to take a look at their profile on LinkedIn, take a look at their background and their career to date. Then we do an assessment, right? What are your strengths and weaknesses to make sure that you're in the right role? If so, that's when we take the next steps, whether to help them get promoted,
Mhm.
help them be more successful in their jobs, or to help them find a new role. So those are the two different aspects and how I work with folks.
Okay. So as I'm listening to you, I'm again, as you've been talking about this, I'm kind of reflecting through my own career, and I've never worked with a coach, although I wish I had. I'm thinking through some of the concepts that I maybe have conflated, and one of those is doing something because you can do it, and the idea of doing something because you should do it. Right? What are you capable of doing, but what
Yes,
energizes you? And
exactly.
I think a lot of people are in jobs that they're just like, hey, I can do this.
hmm
Like, right, I can meet that minimum viable requirement and I pull a paycheck and I have insurance and it is what it is. How do you help your clients see the difference between what they're just good at or what they're capable of
Yeah.
and what actually lights them up?
Yeah. So sometimes I help people be successful in their current roles, but also start some sort of side hustle in their whatever they're passionate about. And oftentimes that passion side hustle will convert into their full time job later. So a lot of clients that I work with kind of are running in parallel tracks, right? The first is paycheck, I get my insurance through my company. It's my day to day. It's fine. I hear it's fine, right? All the time. That tells me that they're not really happy if it's just fine,
Yeah.
right? So I'm in this job where it's fine. And then on the side, we can start to do other things, other jobs, or even volunteer that is in the place that makes them really, really happy. And sometimes that ends up taking over their full time job. Or they're happy with parallel paths, right? I am doing my job and I am volunteering and I'm getting what I need out of it. So maybe outside of my job to make me happy. So that is definitely a few scenarios on how I work with
Okay.
clients in that way.
Yeah, that last one really resonates with me because I think, someone might have a long-standing role and they've got job security and they earn a good living, but just no version of that job's ever going to light them up. And to your point, maybe you fill that particular cup by volunteering or building up a hobby or having a side hustle that takes a couple hours of your work. I think there's this belief in our jobs, just very similar to I think for some people relationships, that this one thing needs to be everything.
hmm
And I think it sounds like what you do is you help your clients explore
Yes.
whether their job can meet all those needs.
Yes.
And then, not every situation, it sounds like, is a teardown, right? Where it's
hmm
like, oh, you got to leave this company.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, look, this is pretty good. It's getting you 70% of the way
Yeah.
there. I don't know that there's necessarily a way to hit 100.
Yeah.
Why don't we supplement that with some of these other things?
Absolutely.
So let's talk. And this Exhibit C, again, I know one of your core services from your website is finding your niche. And I guess what I would ask is what does that look like in practice? Is that like a single session light bulb moment that you have with your
Yeah.
clients, or is it a process that unfolds over time?
I think it really depends on the client, honestly. I do have one call with clients and the light bulb goes off. Like, yes, I'm in the right position. This is the right niche. But many times I give a lot of homework to clients and we meet over like 3 calls where we kind of have check ins. I give them a journal to complete. They really start to kind of reflect. Reflection is really powerful. And sometimes we can't have a really good session unless you've done the reflection.
Mhm.
So many times we might have one call where we kind of get to know each other and start to kind of uncover some of these, their background and maybe do an assessment, and then there might be some homework and reflection to come back and regroup again. So I don't like people to make decisions for their career. It's such a big decision, like overnight. It's not recommended. In
Mhm.
fact, I think whether or not we're meeting more than one time is really up to us, but that time to reflect should never happen in an hour or even overnight, right? It might take a week or two. I have some clients that take a long vacation after we have a couple sessions so that
Mhm.
they can give themselves an opportunity to reflect. And that goes over very, very well because then now they're not, thinking about their job and they're able to really reflect a lot more. And that helps as well. So it really depends.
Okay. It makes sense though. I see both sides or all sides of that. Let's talk next about Exhibit D, which I'm going to call the cost of not knowing. And so I think I want to focus on for a moment what happens when people don't do the sort of work
Yeah.
that you help your clients with,
Yeah.
because I think sometimes people are kind of like, well, I can't easily define it, so it's theoretical. In my experience and from peers and friends of mine, I do think it's real. And I guess I'll share my own version of this. I've been a lawyer for 20 years. I spent so much time kind of just focusing on achieving the next thing, the next thing. And every case I won felt temporary. Every promotion felt like, okay, I'm taking this next step or this next rung on this ladder. And I have these moments of like, do I even want to be climbing this ladder? And I think the momentum that I was experiencing itself became the trap. I was moving so quickly, so focused on achieving that next thing that I never really stopped to ask myself, like, where am I going?
Hmm.
And that's something that I've reflected on over the last couple years. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I consider myself pretty fortunate because, despite not having those hard conversations with myself, I do believe that I've landed somewhere and I'm very fortunate because I enjoy my job. It does make me happy,
Sure.
but I know that I might be in the minority on that. And so what I would ask Carmelina, what do you see from people who come into your office or meet with you who are 40 or 50 or older
Yeah.
who have never done this work? How does that, the failure to stop and decide what you actually want out of your career,
Yeah.
what's the kind of the ugly underbelly of that?
Job burnout is really big. So if you continue to be unhappy in your job and just crank away and you're overdoing it, you will burn out in your career. I think most people wait too long to get help. And I think you could say that for a lot of things, not just with their
Mhm.
career, but it could be a relationship where you've waited too long to get help, right? And it breaks down, and then suddenly, the relationship is over. There's so many things where people kind of wait too long, right? So there should be kind of check-in points with yourself to say, like, okay, the earlier the better, right? Do not wait until you are at a point where you're burnt out at your job or you're struggling so much with your job search that you can't find anything. And then when you're in your interviews, you're not interviewing well because you have a negative mindset, right? And
Mhm.
so waiting too long can be extremely cost.
Yeah, I think I could imagine a situation where someone, I think the longer you wait, there's this like sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
And, I could see someone who's like, well, I've been doing it this long. Like, what's the point? Essentially, you're signing some version of your death certificate, right? You're kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm just going to ride this out.
Yes.
And, for most people, careers are 30, 40 years. And so
Exactly.
it's just for such a meaningful part of our lives, simply from like a time spent working perspective.
Mhm.
It's really surprising to me, especially as we're having this conversation. I just feel like I have these light bulbs going off that people aren't doing more to actively manage these things. I
Yeah.
think one of the things I've spoken about on this podcast before is therapy.
Mhm.
I think therapy in this day and age versus, 30 years ago
Yeah.
has so much less of a stigma, right? I
Exactly.
think some of the healthiest, most well-balanced people are like, "Oh yeah, in therapy this week I talked about X."
Mhm.
I can't imagine anybody saying that. If somebody mentioned therapy 30 years ago, it was a whisper.
Yes.
And I love the fact that the paradigm for our society has shifted to where it's like, yeah, of course you're going to meet with someone who's going to make sure that
Yes.
the way you think about things. And I think, I don't want to conflate career happiness with like overall mental health because I think mental health is something,
Yeah.
the stakes are a little higher. But I also don't think that career happiness or career health is unimportant. And it feels like working with someone and being more deliberate about this. I'm sitting here thinking, should I have my kids, my 16-year-old specifically, start meeting with the career coach like
Yes.
as we're talking? Because I'm like, I would love them to be him to embark on his college
Yep.
journey with a sense of awareness and not just like
Absolutely.
defaulting
Yeah.
into things.
Or, going to a school that's not the right school or like doing liberal arts until you figure it out, but then they never
Yes.
figure it out kind of thing.
Mhm.
Absolutely. A couple things that I
Yeah.
just wanted to touch upon that you said, therapy. I'm also very glad that therapy is now a little bit more understood in the mainstream. Coaching is the second fastest growing segment in the world. So coaching is also having growth like therapy did maybe, I don't know,
Uh,
10, 15 years ago, right? So you see more and more people getting coaching to help you with your journey, right? Everyone
mhm,
should have a mentor. Everyone should have a coach to help them. Even coaches should have mentors. Even coaches should have coaches to help
mhm.
them in their growth. So very, very important that you do so. And as far as doing it sooner than later, absolutely, it will help tremendously to try and figure out, right? Because if you don't know what you want to do, it's going to be hard for you to pick a college even to get into. Some colleges are better at certain things than others, right? And so you want to make sure you're going to a school that will have really good programs in what you want to study. So I'm hopeful for the coaching industry, and I think that more and more people, you're going to start hearing it more and more that people are getting assistance that they need.
Yeah, I think it's a to me, it's a no-brainer. It feels like as you're making these life impacting decisions, why wouldn't you want the benefit of working with someone who
Yeah.
helps you look inward, but then also understand the landscape of what you're about to encounter?
Yeah. And I'll just mention too that a lot of people think coaches are just there for job seeking. Career coaches are just for job seeking, but it's not. It can be anywhere you could be working and need a career coach. You could
Yeah.
be getting into a management role and need management, help. You could be an executive that doesn't really know how to have meaningful conversations or build trust with your teams, right? There's so many different reasons for a career coach. And I also just want to mention in coaching, there's something called the Wheel of Life, and I wrote about it in one of my Forbes articles. And it's interesting because the Wheel of Life has a lot of different aspects to it, and career is just one sliver of it. But what's
Mhm.
interesting is all of the slivers all have the same weight, like family and then career. But the point is that you spend way more time in your career than you do with your families. And people are so unhappy in that giant sliver in that wheel of life. And that's a very, very sad statistic. We should be finding things that we're passionate about so that we can be happier. We can be happier in our relationships because of it. We can be happier in different aspects of our lives because our careers are something that we're most meaningful. It's very, very meaningful to us.
Yeah, the investment, like the need to invest in that is a to me as I'm listening to you and as we're talking is just a no-brainer.
Yeah.
The input output to your point, I work 50 hours a week.
Yeah.
If I'm having a good work week, that bleeds into how I show up with my family or
Yes.
how I show up socially and so to your point, sounds like the wheel of life, the slivers are equal, but from a time spent perspective, it's a little bit more disproportionate.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Carmelina, when we close out the exhibits here, I'm gonna do a bit of a cross examination here, and so I'm gonna throw some objections at you. That as I was preparing for this episode, I started thinking, somebody might be listening to this and have like an eyebrow up and say, "Hey, you know what? Actually, what about this?" So I'm gonna throw some of those at you.
Sure.
No need to respond in depth, but just would love to get your initial reaction. So, first objection: someone's listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, "You know what? This all sounds wonderful, but this is a luxury. Most people just don't get to choose what they want. They have bills, families,
Yeah.
obligations. They take a job that pays them, and knowing what you want is nice in theory, but it's irrelevant when you have a mortgage." How do you respond to that as a coach?
So first and foremost, I have free classes for people that are unemployed. So I do a lot of work where I don't charge people. So one thing I will say is like just speak to somebody to find out if they can maybe pay later after they find a job, something that will help me, right? So it's not that it's very expensive if you're able to get some free services. The other is try and find a volunteer mentor. Right? It doesn't always have to be a coach that's helping you if you have trouble financially. But I will
Yeah.
say that those investments for coaches is going to get you happier, make more money in the end, and it truly is an investment. I have monthly payment plans for people so that they can get the assistance that they need where it's over time, right? And it's not necessarily something they have to pay up 100% upfront. So those investments do help. You mentioned earlier that people get 25% more in their salary with working with a coach so that they're more in their actual job, they're more successful. Well, you're going to set yourself up for success, get a promotion faster. And so that investment is going to go a very, very long way.
Yeah, and I think I can't help but as I was thinking about that objection, sometimes I feel like that's the kind of wall somebody puts up when it's fear-based.
Yeah,
Well, if I did that, yeah, this is a luxury. That sounds great. It's like I've heard that with therapy too.
absolutely.
I don't need that. It's like, no, actually, probably everybody needs maybe at different levels or different degrees, but
Yes.
your response, I really appreciate it. And I completely agree with you. So objection two would be, what if I do the work and I realize that what I want isn't realistic? What if it doesn't exist or it doesn't pay enough or it would require me to start my whole life over at, 47 years old? What do you tell your clients then?
Yeah, so there's pros and cons to everything, right? We all have different pathways in our lives. There's different scenarios. So as a designer, I'm always thinking through what are the scenarios? What are my options? You always have options and those options come with pros and cons, and it's important to work through those with a coach so that you can make the best decision possible. I help people negotiate job offers all the time, right?
Mm.
I mean, can you imagine getting 3 job offers and not knowing which one to pick? Right?
Yeah.
And talking that through on your own, that's really challenging, right? So being
Mhm.
able to think those scenarios through, being able to think through the pros and cons of all of that with a coach can help you make the right decision. Now, that
Yeah.
decision unfortunately is not up to the coach, right? It's up to you, but the coach can give you that guidance and that help that's needed to make the best decision. If for whatever reason you make the wrong decision, right, we all have to kind of pivot. But with going through those pros and cons, we should be able to make a calculated risk and move forward in the right way.
It makes complete sense. So final objection. I think this one's important. So someone's listening and they're thinking, I've tried to figure this out before and I just don't know what I want. Some people aren't wired to have a calling. Not everybody has passion that's undiscovered. What do you say to the person who says, you know what, I've actually tried doing the work and they say they still come up empty?
I would say they haven't asked themselves the right questions and been
Mm.
helped in the right way, right? You can talk about therapists that same way, right? There are therapists that just listen. Are you getting anything out of it? Is there anything
Right.
actionable? How can I make change? How can I be successful? That's a completely different discussion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It makes complete sense.
Yeah.
So, Carmelina, thank you for indulging my objections. Let's move to closing arguments. So, this is the part of each episode where we speak directly to whoever's listening. I'm going to ask you to go first. And I want you to imagine someone sitting in their car right now or on a walk or heading home from work. And, what you've said here today has resonated with them. They feel stuck. They've been drifting. They don't really have momentum in their career. They know something is off, but they can't name it. What do you want them after listening to this episode and these comments to walk away with?
First and foremost, invest in yourself. Secondly, set up a free consultation with someone who can help you. Even attorneys have free consults, I believe.
Mhm. Some of us.
Right. So set up time to at least have a 15-minute discussion on what are the opportunities for me? How can I get some help? You don't have to sign up at that very moment, right? But try your best to get a free consult if you can. So those two things are really critical.
And I guess I'll supplement that. And to anyone listening, here's my closing complimentary to what Carmelina just stated. I spent 20 years, I'm in the midst of a career that at times has looked right from the outside, whether that's the title, my salary, the trajectory. And for most of that time, if someone had asked me what I wanted, I would have said, I want more responsibility, recognition, more. What I've realized in the last few years is that more is not really a direction. It's just momentum. And momentum without clarity is just expensive motion. It's drifting. And so I wish the question that someone had asked me 20 years ago was not, hey, what are you good at? Not what's going to impress people, not what do your parents want, but what do you want? And I wish I had had someone like you, Carmelina, sitting across from me when I was 30 saying, hey, you're going to answer this question honestly,
Mhm.
and we're not going to move past this until you do. Because I think that question is the starting line for everything that matters, regardless of where you are. If you're my 16-year-old son, or a 22-year-old college grad, or a 27-year-old law school grad, or a 47-year-old lawyer who's 2 decades in, I feel like most people have been running through their careers somewhat mindlessly. And
Yeah.
I don't mean that from showing up and doing their jobs. Like they are doing that,
Yeah.
but they're not zooming out and saying, you know what, is this actually what's right for me?
Yeah.
And so if you're listening and you recognize yourself in any of this, the drift, the dissonance, the feeling that, you're being successful, but it's at something you didn't choose. I don't know that the first step is a new job. I think it's an honest answer to an honest question.
Yeah.
And I think, Carmelina, what you help your clients find, which is, hey, what do you want? That's the question. And some people might be listening and say, you know what, I'm going to have that conversation with myself. But if they don't, I would recommend call Carmelina or call another career coach if you know someone. But I think have the conversation as an honest first step.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, of course. So, Carmelina, before we wrap up, one thing I like to do here is give the listeners what I call micro tools. So, a little something they can take out into the real world. And so, what I would ask Carmelina is to give our listeners one exercise, something that somebody can do this week, maybe tonight, to start moving from I don't know what I want to something more specific, something from your coaching practice that you've seen work time and time again.
Yeah, so I would say the journal is really great. If you're in high school, do a journal entry on some roses, thorns, and buds, positives, negatives, and opportunity for growth around my strengths and weaknesses. What do I enjoy? What subjects do I enjoy? What kind of volunteering opportunities do I enjoy? If you are working a job, what are those pros and cons of those roles? Think about your managers. Think about how they've helped you or not helped you. Think about the pros and cons of having worked in different industries, consulting versus government versus startup. Right? What are the pros and cons of having worked in those types of environments? What do you like? What do you not like about those? So you can start to kind of carve out your ideal either pathway forward, the role that you want to get in, the role that you want to study, and or like your trajectory forward.
Love that. I think it's kind of flipping the switch from going through the motions to actually stopping and reflecting and looking inward.
Absolutely.
So, Carmelina, before we let you go, tell our listeners where they can find you and where they can
Yeah.
find out more about Career Coaching Pro.
Well, thank you so much. So careercoachingpro.com is a great place to start. You also can set up a time with me, a consultation. You can find me on LinkedIn. There's a link to set up a consult there. So that's www.linkedin.com/in/Carmelina. Please do connect with me and also follow my content on LinkedIn. Or you can email me, carmelina@careercoachingpro.com.
Wonderful. Well, I will also post all of that information in the show notes for anybody listening who wants to reach out and connect with Carmelina. I would strongly recommend you do so. I'm really glad, Carmelina, that you could join us today. I feel like I've learned a ton. And I did a bunch of reading to prepare, and I thought, okay, I kind of have a sense of how this is going to go. But just spending this hour with you, I feel like has unlocked a few things I want to reflect on myself as I think about the next phase of my career. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. This has been really great. I really appreciate all the time and effort that you've made to give this content to your listeners.
I wish I had had this conversation with you 20 years ago. And like I said, I'm relatively happy in my career, but I feel like I've avoided some of the conversations with myself that I need to have. So definitely committed to having those conversations. And thanks again for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's listening for tuning in. And please remember, whatever your case is, don't be afraid to build it and carry it out into the real world.